was it was it kind of fun last night to realize that you guys have a lot of knowledge? I hopefully you realize that. Okay, my thought today is from C.S. Lewis. Again, I love C.S. Lewis. I don't know if any of you read his stuff. And we're talking about houses, so what do I have to do as a thought about houses? And C.S. Lewis wrote this. He says, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps you can understand what he's doing. He's getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. You knew those jobs needed doing, and so you were not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting up an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, and he is building a house. Sometimes we fail to realize that God is making a palace of us. And so it's a little bit more than we thought. Okay. Is the section on credit cards for those due today, or is that next week? Today. Do you want to hand those on in? Hand this to the aisles here. Bring these on down.
Do you want them all at once?
Pardon me?
Do you want them all at once?
All at once, yes. Hopefully I encourage you to staple them. Make sure you're using the template. So while you're doing that, you know, there's as we talk about household finance, there's a lot of interesting things. There's kind of the old school of thought and the new school of thought. What was the old school of thought about mortgages and houses? Yeah, you know, basically a modest home. Pay it off. Pay it off quickly so you don't have it. Now, who benefits from this type of the old wisdom? You know, basically, the homeowners. You know, recently there's been, you know, and I say recently, the last 10 years, now there's a group that says, hey, wait a second, get as big a house as you can, because the housing market is just going to continue to go up. But you don't want to, you want to borrow as much as you can. You know, because, you know, this is cheap money. So you're paying, let's say your mortgage is 6% after tax, you're paying 4.5%. So you're paying 4.5% money, you invested in the stock market that makes 8%. And you know what, you're making a difference on the spread. So this is kind of what some people have called the new wisdom. Who makes money here? The banks, the mortgage companies. How about the brokers as well? Of course, has the stock market continued to deliver that 8%? I mean, last year was at 15%. And so realize when you think through the issues on this, who are the ones that make the money? So the question is just like we talked about yesterday. All those people who had those interest-only loans, how many of those actually took the extra principal and used it to, you know, to put it aside and to invest in it? And the answer was very few. And so we know what direction we're going. Let's start with a question. Is how should we pick a loan? What are the things that go into our deciding what type of mortgage loan we have? And let me start with just a little chart. Excel. Well, think about it. Why don't you go in your groups and what factors go into picking a loan and how should we pick? So spend 2 minutes in our groups. I'll put up a little spreadsheet up here.
It's a mini like house.
I said I'd cover half of the cost of your
Oh, you're awesome. I guess.
So let's talk about that. What factors go into our choice of which loan? Which factors?
How long you'll be there?
How long do you expect to be in the home? If you're only going to be there 5 years, you know, maybe an interest-only portion, and you think the house will appreciate. A lot of ifs. Other things, how long are you going to be there?
The fees and stuff you have to pay for the loan.
What are the fees and stuff for different loans? Because if you know what, if you stay there 30 years, you're allocating those fees over the whole time period. If you're only there 5 years, all of a sudden, those costs and those points are allocated over a shorter time period.
How risk averse you are as far as variable?
Right? How much are you willing to take that interest rate risk? And what's the cost of you to take it? If I can get a fixed for 3.5% and I get an adjustable rate for 3.3%, I'm giving up 0.2% for 30 years of interest rate risk. Other thoughts? Let's see if we can fill this out. So what we've got here is different types of loans, and here's kind of my thoughts on the things that go into the mortgage loan decision. What's your time horizon? How long do you plan to be in the home? What's your real risk tolerance? Are you willing to take the interest rate risk, and it can be substantial? What are your cash flow preferences? Do you have cash flow concerns right now? What are your goals for this house? So things like that. So let's kind of fill it. If your time horizon's very long, what's probably your preferred?
30.
Probably 30 years. And what type of a loan? Fixed. So generally, the certainty, we're very certain, no prepayment, would probably go into fixed because over the long term. Skyler.
Because adjustable rates, like right now interest rates are really low, but in like the 80s there and stuff, they're really high.
Yep.
If you got an adjustable rate over time, does your rate go down? Or do they put it?
So, but what's the likelihood? Anyone think interest rates are going to go down now? Raise your hand. So we've got a class of upperclassmen and no one thinks rates are going to go down.
I was just wondering in case if rates ever like were really high.
Yeah, they could. How about if your view is less than 10 years? You might do a 7-1 arm. So a 7-1 is fixed for the first 7 years, and then, but still you've got 3 years of risk there. How about if you're willing to take the interest rate risk? You can do the arm. How about if you want to minimize your current payments? Might the interest-only option be interesting? Possibly scary, but interesting. A lot of these income fluctuates dramatically. You know, you could possibly. The key is you have the discipline. You might take an interest only and then pay it off. Pay off full principal and loan. You want to buy as large a house as you can. A house. Should we assume a house is a long-term investment? We would treat it differently. A house is a place to raise your kids. Have other high-rate debt that I want to pay down as soon as I can. So the key here is we need to look at it. And again, I give you my biases. You know, I talked about this couple, one who was my TA last semester, and they did a 30-year loan for 3.3% and no points. You know, she's a very good negotiator. And you have to be a good negotiator, but if you kind of follow the principles that we'll talk about. You know, if you can save 1/4 to 0.5% of interest over 30 years, that can be a substantial amount. So let's talk a little bit about points and comparing loans. Now notice that there's no personal financial plan part of this home buying. So what we want to do is, this is really for your own education, and I hope you use it well. How many people here in the next 5 years are going to be buying a house? Probably almost a good chunk of you. So let's be wise in what we do. So what we're doing now is we're trying to understand how do we get the best deal we can. So we're going to talk about points and fees and understanding mortgage loans, and then we're going to go through the home buying process. And then we'll finish it up on Tuesday here. But realize your mortgage loan is based on a number of things. Number one, it's based on your points. It's based on your upfront costs and expenses. It's based on escrow costs, and then also principal and interest costs. So it's not just principal and interest, it's all of these other things here. And so what we need to do is we need to understand each of these areas, and what we'll do is we'll talk about those. So a point is 1/100th of 1%, or it's 100 basis points of the loan. So if you have a $200,000 loan and you pay 1 point, how much are you paying? $2 grand. So why do they charge points? They charge points for a couple of reasons. Number one, recover some of the costs with lending. There are things called origination points. Number two, it increases the effective interest rates, and we'll actually talk about that. We'll do some calculations. Number three, it gives you some negotiating flexibility. They will lock in a loan right now that won't have to be funded for 30 days. And so it gives them some room for changes. What's the relationship between borrowing costs and mortgage choice? Generally, if you go to a mortgage broker, will they just have one loan out there for you? No. They'll have a whole sheet. They'll have 30 different loans with 30 different points and 30 different interest rates and things like that. So they have a number of different options. And your option is to go out and find the one that it minimizes the interest rate. I mean, we're all familiar with that one. We want to minimize the interest rate. But you also want to minimize the points you pay. You want to minimize the fees you pay. And we'll talk a little bit later about the back-end bonuses. So the relationship, they offer many choices on different interest rates and different points, and you want to minimize that effective cost of borrowing. So you might be able to get, right now, you might be able to get 4% and no points. You might get 3 3/4% and 1 point, or 3.5% and 2 points. Who keeps the points? Do you get to pay to do that? Or does the mortgage broker keep the points? Who keeps the points? Actually, the mortgage broker does. So how do you differentiate? The lender retains the amount attributable to points. So if I've got to buy a $200,000 house and I'm paying 2 points, how much money do I actually have to borrow? Roughly $204,000. Because the points don't go to me, they go to the lender. Do I have to pay back that whole $204,000? The answer is yes. So anyone heard of a term called a good faith estimate? What is a good faith estimate? It's an estimate provided by the mortgage lender, item on a list of all upfront fees and costs associated with your loan. So this includes loan fees, fees paid back, reserves or escrow accounts, title charges, government charges. And why is it important? It allows you to compare different loans from different lenders. So here's what it looks like. I can make this bigger. You can see, I'm up here, home payables in connection with the loan, title charges, government recording and transaction charges, additional charges, estimated reserves, prepayment costs, transaction summary. When you go on the PowerPoints, if you can take a look at it, I'll try to make that better. Well, is that a little easier to see? Yeah. Good faith estimates now. Loan charges, appraisal fee, credit report, assumption fee, mortgage broker's fee, tax, service processing, underwriting, wire transfer, admin fee. Notice that there's a lot of fees there. So it's not the simple just principal and interest. Then we can continue on down. We can see the second half here. Here's the summary fees. Here's your reserve prepaid interest, mortgage insurance. hazard insurance, country property tax, funding fee, reserves deposited with lenders. So we now have total estimated prices needed to close, closing costs, things like this. So your good faith estimate, what it does is it gives you an idea of the fees that are needed. And so what we want to do is we want to calculate the effective interest rate. Now, we did the effective annual interest rate before. Remember, you take a look at it, you added the impact of compounding in here. And this is a little bit different. This is different from your effective annual interest rate. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take into account all costs, including out-of-pocket costs. You know, when I sold my house in Arlington, Virginia, we had other costs that went along with selling. We had termite damage. You know, that's not considered in my loan amount, but it was considered in all of the costs that we had to pay. And so what we want to do is we want to figure out what this effective rate. It's different from your APR. APR is a number that's generated from a precise calculation of Regulation Z of the Truth in Lending Act of 1976. The effective rate, interest rate, is an interest rate the borrower was paying after all fees and costs are taken into account. We have to make an assumption. The assumption is all costs come out of the loan or are paid back by the loan. So that's kind of our assumption. Okay. And the reason this is important, the question is, how will you know if you've got a good rate? If we calculate this effective interest rate, the lower this effective interest rate, the better the deal that we get. And so that's kind of our challenge here. So how do we calculate? So it's the rate to the borrower after all costs and fees are taken into account. Remember that the lender retains all the points. And then the borrower pays all out-of-pocket costs. And so the question is, how do you account for these out-of-pocket costs? And so that's what we're going to do. So here's how it's calculated. Number one, calculate the payments on the total amount of the loan. So we've got a $200,000 loan. What are the payments on that? Number two, we calculate the money you actually received, i.e. the total less all costs, and that includes points, includes fees, and other things here. So if you have a $200,000 loan and you pay 2 points, how much do you actually receive? $196,000. Set your payment to this amount, minus PV is what you actually received, n is your number of years, and you solve. This is the rate you're actually getting. So it takes into account all the fees. So let's do a little case. Grab your calculators or your spreadsheets. Brett and Jen decided on their dream house, well, at least their first house. Two $200,000 fixed rate loans, both which are amortized over 30 years. A is for 6% with no points for loan origination fees, and B is for 5 3/4% with a $1,500 loan fee of 1 point. Assuming they stay in the house for 30 years, which loan is more advantageous based on the effective interest rate? So remember the three-step process. Number one, we calculate your payments on a total amount. Step two, we calculate the amount you actually received. Step three, you set your payments to the amount that you pay back. Your minus PV to the actual amount you received, and for your number of years, and then you calculate your interest rates. Does that make sense? I see blank stares. Okay, if you have a question, just raise your hand. Well, let's give about, let's get 3 minutes on this. And the good news, you're in your groups. And if you have a question, just raise your hand. She's got the calculator. step 2 is you calculate your amount received. So it's your total amount minus your points. Now I have a question here. What's my effective interest rate for loan A? 6%. So if you've got no costs and no fees, your APR equals your effective interest rate. So we only have to calculate it for loan B.
Yeah.
We ready to go through this, or do you want a little bit more time? Okay, let's give you another minute. So calculate your payments. Calculate what you actually received. Set your payment to equal your payment minus BD to equal the amount that you actually received. N is your number of years, and you solve for your real numbers. So your payment is 1,200, whatever your monthly payment is. So here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing. We're putting in our payments. We're putting in the amount we actually received. We're putting in the periods, and then we're calculating what's the rate of interest that was given to us.
Oh, but first we have to go.
Right, so that's step 1. Yeah, but in this case here, you just send the 200,000.
Oh, so I've
Yeah, just for the sake of this. And we'll assume that the house is 136,000. But let's do, and assuming annual payments. Okay, so let's kind of go through it. Someone want to talk me through it? So loan A, since there's no points and no fees, we know what our effective interest rate. How about loan B? What's your payment? So we talked about annual payments. Will you get a slightly different answer for monthly payments versus annual payments? And the answer is yes. But the point will be the same. So what did you get for your payment? Yeah, 14,143. Now calculate how much did you actually receive? How much was that? What were the fees you paid? 1 point plus 1,500 fees. So total amount of fees, 35. Subtract that out. 196.50. How about what was your effective interest rate?
We got 5.91.
5 point. Set your payment to this equal here. N equals 30. Your PV to minus, you solve for I, and you got 5.91%. So which of those loans would you take based on just your effective interest rate?
B.
A or B?
B.
B. But the question is, you have to, with question B, what we do is we're allocating those fees over 30 years. What happens if we're not in the home for 30 years? Jerry, you had a question?
Yeah, why are we doing 30 years and not converting it to months?
Because I asked him the problem for an annual payment.
Oh, it is.
So I just asked him that. So the question now becomes, what about prepayment? How many people are actually going to stay in their house for 30 years? And prepayment could be a number of things. Prepayment could be you sold the house. You know, you sold the house. It could be work really did well and you won the lottery, which I did. Lots of reasons on prepayment. So the question is, how do you calculate the effective interest rate when you plan to prepay the loan before maturity? Which is more a likely case. I've always thought I was going to stay in every house I lived 30 years. The first house we lived in 4 years. Second house we lived in it 8 years. The third house we lived in 2 years. And I've been in this house 13 years, which is the longest I've ever lived in one place. So here what we need to do is, it's very similar, except we have to calculate the amount remaining at the end of the prepayment date. And so the question is, how do we calculate that balloon payment? So we've got a loan, 30-year loan. Say we're paying 6%. I'm just using the numbers. Is that what it looks like on your prepayments when you pay things off? Or is it more like this? It's actually more like this. Because the first part, you're paying a lot more principal, a lot more interest and a lot less principal. How do we figure out how much we owe on the loan, let's say there at the end of year 20? How do we figure out what the principal is?
Yeah, you can take the payments from the last 10 years and discount them back.
So you can take the payments from the last 10 years. So for 10 years, you can discount it back. Other thoughts? Yes?
Or you can take payments for 20 years and find the future value after.
Yeah, you can take payments for 20 years and find the future value. So lots of different ways. But what we need to do is we need to find that value there. So what we're doing here is it's very similar. Very similar. So you get your balloon payment, take your payment as your payment. N is the number of years remaining. I is your interest rate, and solve for your present value. That's I is the present value of all remaining payments. So here's how we do it with expected prepayment. So number one, we calculate our payment. Number two is actually the same too. We calculate our amount received. Number three, we calculate our balance remaining after you prepay. So we're going to prepay after 12 years, and we still owe $180,000. We said, again, your number of years before prepayment is your N, balance remaining is your future value, amount received is your PV, and solve for I, your effective income. So does that make sense? Okay, so let's do a problem. Okay. So now we've got two loans. Likely be in the home for 6 years. The job looks promising. Trent compromises. He says, well, let's assume we'll be in the house for 12 years. Because do we really know how long we're going to be in the house? Yeah, so we just kind of have to make an assumption. So now they've got 200,000 fixed rate loans, amortized over 30 years, but will be paid back in 12 years. Loan A, 6%, no points and no fees. So what's our effective rate, even if we prepay on loan A? Still 6%. Now loan B is the same 5.75% and 1,500 loan fees. So calculate the effective interest rate for both loans, assuming we prepay after 12 years and make annual payments. So do we understand how to do the problem? Okay. Step 1 and 2 are the same as we did before. Calculate your payments on the total amount borrowed. Calculate the amount received. Step 3 is slightly different. What we need to find out is what is our principal owed at the end of the prepayment period. How do we do that? We're going to we've got $200,000 loan. We're going to prepay it after 12 years. We'll just take our payments. We still have 18 years left to pay on it if we're prepaying it after 12 years. So take the present value of 18 years of that payment, and that will tell you how much you owe. And then put in your payment. Put in minus PV is the amount received. Your future value is the balloon payment at the end of that time period, and calculate, solve for it. Still see some puzzles. Let's give you 3 minutes. Again, work on it in your groups. Actually, we'll give you 5 minutes on this one. If you have a question, raise your hand. Okay. So A, we already know. It's the same payment. It's the same payment. So the good news is you've already done your payments and you've already done your amount received. Now what we have to figure out is just your balloon payment. Eric.
We were kind of curious at the point. You said it's 101%, right?
Pardon me?
You said 1 point is every
1% of the loan.
Oh, it's 1%.
Yeah.
1 point, no, okay.
1 point is a point is 100 basis points or 1% of the loan.
Okay. That 100 basis points.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
That's how we talk in asset management. 100 basis points.
You did asset management confusing.
I like to confuse me too.
Yeah.
So we want to,
So I have another question. When we're calculating future value or present value, we're doing the changes first, right?
What we want to do is you want to calculate this balloon. We're going to pay it off after 12 years.
Right.
So to calculate that balance remaining is the present value of the remaining period, 18 years.
Okay.
Okay. So you can do the future value on 12 years or the present value.
Got it.
If you have questions, raise your hand and I'll make sure you're
So what kind of day?
No, we're trying to see how much. It's like year 12. It's year 12. Take the president, so we pay it off after 12 years. So So we take 30 minus 12 is 18 years. So what's the present value? And we're not going to pay. And that will give us so we can, it depends on the points you're using.
Well, the present value of 18
What happens is you're allocating those
Something like that, yeah. It's like a $300 right away and never. Well, so I'm going to try to I think I figured that.
Dang it! Would someone like to take me through this?
That's a quick question. Should the present value of 18 years of the payments back and the future value of payments for 12 years
Be the same.
be the same?
Yes. So as Scott. Robinson. I just got the first letter right. As Scott said, you can do either of those. So we already know loan A, regardless of the time period, no points and no fees, it's already going to be the same. So we calculate our payments, amount received, which is the same 196. And what did you get for your balloon payment? What was your balloon payment at year 12? Eric, what did you get?
I thought I got 156,000.
156,000. Notice you've paid for 12 years. How much have you paid? You paid 14,000 a year. So 14,000 a year times 12. How much have you paid towards your loan?
I don't know, a lot.
A lot. So basically 150,000. But how much have you paid off on your principal? 44,000. So you paid 140,000, 158,000 in principal and interest, but you've only paid 44,000 down on the mortgage. It makes you feel good. So you paid almost 100,000 in interest. So it makes you feel good on these loans. And so what did you get for your effective interest rate? So we set this in, solve for our effective rate. Here's our payment. Here is our amount received. We've got 12 years. We're going to prepay it after 12 years. Our future value is this. Solve for I, and what did you get? Someone besides Eric, what did you get? 5.98. So at 12 years, so here's the question. Can we now do a break-even point on this analysis? So if you're going to go, what is our break-even point? Somewhere between probably 12 and 13 years. So if we go less than 12 years, is it cheaper to go loan A or loan B? Probably loan B if you go more than 12 years. Yes?
So I'm still a little bit confused. That future value is what we still have remaining to pay back in year 12.
That's right.
So all of a sudden in year 12 we have $156,000
Yes,
to
that's
pay
it.
back?
And so here's what happens. You sell the house. You move from San Francisco to LA.
Okay.
And so what happens is when the people buy the house, the first thing they do is they pay off their loan.
Okay.
So that's
Sorry,
kind of
I
different.
was.
So let's go on to another problem. Now, the broker said for one more buy down point, he can give you the same 50, he can give you loan C with an interest rate of 5.5%. Now what I want you to do is know how to do these problems. And so let's share a learning tool that can help you with this. Now the sad part is you can't use this learning tool on your, use this learning tool on the quizzes, but you can use it when you go. So I'm going to come to Learning Tool 19. And so this has got a home loan comparison. So we said the first one was $200,000. What did we say? 6%, 30 years. We'll make one payment a year. No points and no fees. Notice that 6% there. Our effective interest rate is at 6%. Notice on loan 2, we said, again, 200,000. 5, and we did 30 years, 1 year. And what did we say? Notice our 5.91%. Notice we did loan 3. Again, 200,000. We said 5.5 years. And what did we say? We said 2 points and 1,500 fees. 5.75%. Now let's go back here and again. Now what if we prepayment after the number of years? Notice that 6%. We prepay. We'll save $104,000 in interest. But notice that effective interest rate doesn't change at all. Make sure you guys can see what I'm seeing. Again, loan 2, we're going to prepay after 12 years. 5.9%. Now notice what we can do with this. 13 years. 15 years. So if we're there more than 15 years, which A is better, loan A or loan B? Loan B. How about if we prepay after 10 years? In fact, our break-even point is right at 10 years. So we'll put 12 years here. Now we can also go to loan C and say at 12 years, 5.85%. But do you see the tools we've given you? Do you see the power of what we've given you? Now you can go in and you can compare various loans from various brokers and find the one that gives you the lowest effective interest rate. So what we want to do is we want to minimize, to know if we've got a good loan, we want to minimize our effective interest rate, which is our points, our costs, and our fees. We want to minimize our costs, basically out-of-pocket costs. And then a little bit later we'll talk about the back-end bonus to the mortgage broker. So questions, do you think you could calculate this? Could you do this type of analysis on a quiz? The good news is because you probably will. But just a hint. Okay, and this is a nice little tool to have. And if you can actually see what happens here. One other thing too. We had talked last week about we'll just use our 200,000 5 3/4 loan. What would it take? In fact, let's say interest rates. What are interest rates right now? 3.5. So our payment, principal and interest only. This is not escrow accounts. What would it take to cut that interest rate from a 30-year loan to a 30-year loan? What tools could we use in Excel?
To cut it from 10 years to what?
To a 15-year. So how about if we did a what-if analysis, goal seek, we want to set that to 15. Oh. Well, let's say if we did $100 extra a month, we just cut 4.92 years. So look at that right there.
Wow.
we did 200 extra a month, 8.33. If we did 400 extra a month, 13 years. If we did 450, 13.83. If we did 500, so basically almost 525. You pay it extra 530 a month, we can actually take a 30-year loan and cut it down to a 15-year loan. So those are the things we want to do. And so this is just a fun little tool to kind of help you. And it also tells you how much you save. You do that, you cut it to a 15-year loan, you just save $66,000 in interest. Even at 3.5%, that's still a lot. Okay. So you now have the tools to be able to do these things. So let's go through the process of buying a home. What are the things that you talk about? What are the things you need to be aware of? Understand the home buying process. Every year for BYU's Young Alumni, I do a presentation. I do a home buying seminar. So this is kind of an important thing. This is something that people are very interested in. And here is where I could probably save you quite a bit of money if you're kind of following the process. So really, it's a 4-step process. Number 1, understand your limits. Know yourself, your budget, what you can afford. Number 2, find your house. Figure out what you want and go and find it. Number 3, negotiate your loan. Know what the net lenders need and want so you can be ready to get the best loan for you. And number 4 is enjoy home ownership. Remember, you're a steward over the things that the Lord has blessed you. And a home is not just principal and interest costs. It's principal and interest and insurance and maintenance and all of these things. So there's a lot of additional costs that you need to have. So understand your limits. Really, there are 8 things here. Your budget, your credit score, front and back end ratios, bank ratios for LDS, your preferred loan type. What do you need for a down payment? 2 years of copies and taxes and get pre-approved. So let's go through these. The first is living on a budget. Each of you are doing that. You guys know, and was it next week you have to turn in your budget for January? Now realize, I know that the first month's budget is a fudge. We didn't start till like a third of the way through it, but I still want you to do it. So do the best you can. And realize too that a budget is not, I've never been perfect on my budget. I've never been to the penny. I've never even been probably to the $10. But I do get, we have been better as we go along. And so the more you work at it, the better. And President Kimball said every family should have a budget. And it's critical for us, before you even buy this house, that you figure out what your budget is. What can you afford? Know your lifestyle. Know if you're planning for kids, kids make a big dent in the budget. And it's not just diapers and stuff. There's a lot of other things too. Lifestyle changes, taxes, babies, new jobs, new cities. Those can be expensive. Again, we talked about budgeting the old way and the better way. And now, if we do it the better way, we've got twice the chance of accomplishing our goals. You pay the Lord first and yourself second. Third, know your credit score. It's been fun, people coming in and talking to me about their credit score. I forgot who it was who came in and she had a credit score of like 807.
Whoa.
She was, you know, I'm 50 years older and her is, and my credit score's not as good. But make sure you do that. Make sure you check your credit reports to make sure that the information is correct. And about every 2 years, I get a copy of your FICO score. And in addition, there's places like Credit Karma and another places that will actually calculate it for you. It's not a FICO score, but at least it gives you an idea in case there's any problems. We talked about getting it, what determines your credit score, so we've already been through that. Now what we want to do is realize that the mortgage industry goes through trends. It used to be, when I was younger, that the mortgage industry, all they did is they looked at what are called front and back end ratios. And it's a way of determining how much money should you be spending each month on mortgage expenses. And later on, when the FICO scores came out, all of a sudden they started moving just toward a FICO score. And all of a sudden people started finding people who had high FICO scores, still, they didn't have the money to pay it back, they still couldn't pay it back. So now we're swinging back the other way. So we need to understand both sides. So the first ratio is this, your front-end ratio or your housing expenses. It calculates what % of income is used to pay your mortgage payments. And ideally, the ratio that most banks use is 28%. So it's 28% of your gross income. So here we've got monthly mortgage principal, mortgage interest, property taxes, and insurance divided by your monthly gross income. And if that amount is more than 28%, you're at risk. And so the second one is called the back-end ratio, or debt obligation. So the first one didn't care what your debts were. It's just on a standard ratio, it's 28%. Now what we're doing here, now it's monthly PITI and other debt obligations. So debt obligations, mortgage payments, credit cards, student loan, car and other loan payments, anything that will go beyond 1 year. And so now we have two different ways of figuring that, and ideally you should be within those limits. And then how about for LBS? I mean, those limits are good for the general population, but what other payments do we have? Yeah, payments to our most important creditor. Should we take that into account? And also, do I want you guys to pay yourself as well? And the answer is yes there. And so what we'd like to do is, we're going to use teaching tool 7 or 11, which is mortgage payments. And so let's just go through and do this and see what the bank will lend you versus what probably we should borrow. So let's say 30 years. What's our interest rate? What, 3.5% now? And we'll estimate monthly real estate insurance payments at about $200. What's our annual income? Well, first of all, okay, monthly, we won't worry about that. Are we going to pay any points? No. Okay, no points. Well, probably some other closing costs. What's our tax rate? Do we say 30% marginal tax or average tax rate? Our marginal tax rate. Because what we want to do is, we're also going to back what we save. If we save in tax deferred accounts, there's actually a tax shield there. So what do we want for our annual income? Someone want to be a guinea pig for me?
100,000.
50.
Whoa.
Okay, let's start with 50,000. Okay.
Let's go 59.
Okay, we'll go 60. Okay, we've got 60,000. It makes the math easier. So we divide it by 12. That gives us 5,000 a month. Multiply it by 28%, gives us $1,400. We know what our real estate insurance payments are from above, up to $200. So now we have $1,200 a month that can go toward principal and interest payments. We do our $1,200 at 3.5% interest for 30 years, and we can make a payment of we can borrow $267,000. Does that make sense? Do we understand the logic behind it? We had some people shaking their heads.
Oh no, it's just.
Sorry, Seth. So, but that's what it is. So we calculate our monthly income, multiply it by 28, take away property taxes and property insurance, and that gives us the amount that we can spend for principal and interest. 30-year loan at our interest rate. Now, so that's your front end. Now let's take our back end method. So now let's talk about for LDS. First of all, how about tithes and offerings? So I just put 12%. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And so, is there a tax shield on that amount? And so, instead of costing us all 12%, it's really 8.4%. How much are we going to save each month in savings?
20.
Okay, 20%. And what percent of that is going to go into qualified retirement accounts? Say what percent is going to go into a 401k? Say half of that?
Yeah, 10%.
Okay, so 50%. So because half of that 20% is going to go into a 401k, and that's a deferred retirement account. there's actually a tax shield on that, so it's actually only going to cost us this. Instead of costing us 20%, it's going to cost us 17%. So now, additional payments, 25.4. So now instead of that $1,200 a month for principal and interest, we've got $844. And that gives us basically $190,000. Now let's look at the back end. So it's that same $5,000, now it's 36%. How about any auto loans, credit card? You can't pay in 12 months? I just put $100. How about student loans? Monthly student loans, I put $400. So $500. Again, now we're at $1,800 minus 2 is $1,600. Minus 5 is $1,100. And so now we're good for $244. Again, using that same analysis, $171. So what the bank would lend you, generally they'll do the lower of your front or your back end ratio. So in this case here, they would do 244. What we would, actually this right here is not saying what we'd tell you to do, but we would tell you to think about. So 180. So it's probably somewhere between those two is what you want. Again, our goal here is to give you things to think about. And so once you do that, calculate your ratios, taking into account your paying the Lord and taking into account paying yourself. And then you want to choose your preferred loan type. Fixed rate, again, this is the recommended now. You know, you could probably get 3.5% or less. If you do an adjustable rate, you'll probably get 3.3, something like that. So be wise in what you do. Again, remember your options. Again, for most people, I'd recommend a fixed rate. But then you can kind of look through that. And then choose your loan term. We saw that tool here that said for a 30-year loan, we can actually take a 30-year loan, convert it to a 15-year loan by just making an extra payment. You know, in our $200,000 example, what did we say? If you pay an extra $535 a month, you can convert that 30-year loan into a 15-year loan. So just something to think about. I mean, you've got the tools to make them. Okay, the next thing we want to do is determine our down payment and our upfront costs. So realize there's a lot of upfront costs here in this, right? Conventional loans, why do we recommend 20%?
To avoid
Steve.
the PMI.
Right, to avoid PMI, and PMI can be a couple $100 a month, $100 to $200 a month. FHA loans, you can get by as little as 3.5%. VA loans, 0% because you're in the military. And I like this. Begin saving now. Once you realize how hard it is to save, it'll make it so you don't spend too much. It's so easy to spend borrowed money. It's so difficult to spend money you save. I have a niece, she was saving up, she's a photographer. She was saving up for the $7,000 camera. And so, you know, all of her money, she paid her tithes and offerings, and the rest of it just went right back into her account. And it took her like 2 years. Finally, when she got all the money there, she said, it was so hard to save, I'm not how I decided to keep using the camera that she had. But that's what we need. That's what we need to realize. And then realize your costs. Down payment, 3 to 20% of the loan amount. Closing costs, including points, 3 to 7%. And realize there's a lot of these expenses. You know, origination fee, appraisals, term unexpected, credit report, prepaids.
Quick question. If you had more money to of the down payment, I'm not saying like a little bit, would you recommend doing that? Like even if you just maxed out the down payment, or is there a reason maybe to give it a cap between like a certain range?
The question would be, do you have your emergency fund? So I probably maintain my emergency fund at 3 to 6 months income, and then I put the other things down.
But there's not really a limit of how much you can.
Right. You could put significant. So then you've got also impound escrow reserve accounts. These are taxes for that, insurance, lease payments, other items as they become due. They're over and above your mortgage payments amount. So your mortgage payment may be $1,000, but your monthly payment may be $1,200 a month because you've got $200 a month that goes to your kind of your escrow accounts. May or may not be required, but most of the time they are. And then points, we talked about that. 100 basis points. This money's prepaid interest paid to a mortgage broker. It's deducted from the loan proceeds. So They charge points. You have to pay points. Generally, the origination points is yes, but the other points are no. So the other ones are called discount points. And then we have 2 years of tax returns. And the reason they like that is they want to be able to see that you do have the income to be able to pay that on. And most of the time for students, if you have your confirmed job letter with a salary, they will accept that to show that you have the ability there. And then the final thing is you want to get pre-approved. Someone asked me the question on Tuesday. They said because my sister was getting a loan, and so she worked with one mortgage broker, and they pulled her credit report. Now she works with another mortgage broker, and that hurt her credit score because now you've got 2 people paying it. And I told her the answer is no, because once the first mortgage broker pulls her credit, and it's a credit for a mortgage, there's a 90-day window. And you can have as many mortgage brokers pull your credit as you want during that 90-day window, and it's considered a single pull. Now on day 91, if someone pulls it, now that's considered a second pull. So be aware here. So what you want to do is you want to get pre-approved, not pre-qualified. Story, a guy was thinking about buying a house, and so he called his mortgage broker. And the mortgage broker just over the phone said, "How much do you make?" And he told him how much he made. And he says, "Well, you're probably good for this amount, $250,000. So he goes out and finds a loan for $250,000. He puts earnest money down. That means, and then he goes into close, to work on the details of the loan. And the mortgage broker says, "Well, wait a second, we didn't pull your credit. I didn't realize you had these student loans, and I didn't realize you had these car loans." When you get pre-approved, the lenders have pulled your credit score, they've looked at your tax records, and they've approved you for a certain amount of the loan. So it's almost, not quite, but pretty much guaranteed you can do. Pre-qualified means it's a rough estimate. So make sure when you do this that you're pre-approved and not pre-qualified. So questions on know your limits. Know your budget. Know your credit score. Know your front end and your back end ratios. Know your ratios for LDS. I actually have a friend, Scott Marsh, who teaches this, and he said, "Brian," he said, "when you teach about housing," he says, "take your shoe off and pound it on the table." And he says, one of the biggest reasons for bankruptcies here is people buy too big a house. They buy a house based on the salaries of both them and their spouse, and they know they're going to have kids in the future. And if I could give one piece of advice, it would be not buy too big a house. I mean, my house is paid for. If I had to do my life over again, I'd go back and buy a smaller house. And we still have 7 people in the house. But if I would do it over again. But encourage you to be wise. Don't qualify on 2 incomes when you know you're going to go to 1. Okay. Any questions on the know your limits? Okay. Let's go. Let's find your home. Again, 6-step process. A lot of it is figuring out what's important to you in a home. What's important to you? Location, home style and layout, number of bedrooms, garages. First house we bought in Arlington, Virginia, we bought because I was the executive secretary to the bishop. Had a job, graduated with my PhD, took a job with an asset management company, and I wasn't making a lot of money. And we'd go look at houses and just be way off, out of our range. I mean, anything above 200,000 is out of our range. And you almost have to take things into your own hand. And finally, I was setting up appointments for the bishop, and this lady came in and said she was moving back to St. George. And I said, "Well, my wife and I are looking for a house." She says, "Oh, you ought to come over and take a look at it." So we came over and we looked at the garage, and the garage was detached. And the front left corner of the garage was 14 inches lower than the back right, front left back right corner, because the garage was built on dirt. There was this old motor in there. Needless to say, it was a piece of junk, and my wife said, "Don't ever talk to me about that. Don't ever, we're not interested. That house is a piece of junk." And needless to say, 6 months later, we owned that house. Figure out what's important to you. Location, style and layout, number of bedrooms, garages, future plans. Realize you'll probably move within 5 to 7 years if you're like the average U.S. family. A plan. Establish a plan for finding your home. You know, once you know your limits, what you can afford, where you want to be, figure out what's important to you. So our house in Arlington, Virginia, we spent 3 Saturdays a month for probably 2.5 years. You know, Darren's dad, John Mason, helped us work on that. All the hard stuff we had John do. And so when we moved to Walnut Creek, what's the last thing we wanted to do? Last thing we wanted to do was a fixer-up house. And you know, it's amazing, we would drive around and would see a house, and this is in the 1990s. We would look at a house in the morning, and by afternoon it would be sold. We'd look at the house in the afternoon, the next morning it would be sold. And then we decided, okay, we needed to be quick on what we're doing. And so, you know, we needed something. We already had 3 kids. You know, and the way we figured out where we wanted to live, I worked in San Francisco. I figured out how much commute time did I want, and Walnut Creek was about an hour's worth of commute time, and that's kind of the maximum I wanted. And so we started looking at interest, looking in earnest. And so we found this one house. It was kind of a weird lot. It's a long lot and narrow, but we figured, okay, we can put, you know, swing set and stuff for the kids there. And so we made an offer for it, and by that afternoon we owned it. Yet one thing we didn't realize as you come out of our driveway, we were 3/4 of the way up a hill. So if my kids would kick a ball in the driveway, it's a half a mile down the hill before they stop. And it's a half a mile walking up. And so what did we learn after that? We wanted a flat lot. And so, you know, and it's funny, you learn all these things. And so our next house, we bought a lot and we built a house, and it was a flat place. But then, you know, the only view we had, if you go into the walk-in closet, we had a little window here, and from that window you could see Mount Diablo. But there was absolutely no view at all. So, you know, figure out what's important to you and your life. But keep to your plan. I like Zillow.com. You know, it gives you some reference. I mean, those are kind of the assessed value. But there's lots of different things. Find reference home values you may be interested in. You know, be patient and you take your time. Realize if you're going to be there less than 3 to 5 years, renting's the best way to go. You know, I actually think, you know, if you can go to a place, rent a luxury apartment, nice apartment. Most of you have been poor for the last 6 years or 4 years. And so something you have a little bit, but rent an apartment for 6 months so you get a sense on what you like in the area. And that's often a good thing. But realize you've got to make 6 to 7% on your house just to break even when you sell it, and that's just the realtor fees. It doesn't count all the money you put into, you know, to fix the front yard and add the grass and to put in the fences and all of these things. Your house, don't be too quick to buy a house. You know, I hear people say, well, if you're renting, you're throwing your money away. Well, look, you want to tell me how much money I've spent on my house just on maintenance? I actually have my next door neighbor just returned from his mission. He's an older guy. Today's his 3rd day working on my house. And luckily, he's a wonderful guy, and he charges, I think, only $25 an hour. But you know, the nice thing is all these things. You remember the honey-do list? Now these are norm-do lists. But I enjoy that. But realize there's a lot of expenses when you sell a house. And do your homework. Get a realtor, someone who knows the ins and outs. But who do realtors work for? Do they work for the buyer or the seller? The seller. So often, as the size of the house gets bigger, you might be interested to look into what's called a buyer's broker. And the buyer's broker works for you and you pay that person. Take matters into your own hands. Use the internet. We were in Walnut Creek and we were looking to come back here to BYU. So what we do is we got a realtor in the area that we wanted, and then we just started looking on the internet, UtahRealEstate.com. There's a number of different websites. And be careful with your realtor. When we were moving to Walnut Creek, this realtor only showed us houses in his ward and his state. So it was kind of fun. He said, no, we would like things a little bit closer. But be wise in what you do. Talk with your friends. Stay true to your plan and have patience. I think that's the hardest thing. Sometimes your best negotiating tool is just to walk away. And then be creative if necessary. I mean, we didn't have a huge down payment. But the lady, when it came time, she was moving we just said, well, if you use a realtor, how much money will it cost you? So we estimated the cost of the house, and we said, okay, we'll give you that money that you would have received after the realtor's cost. Which basically said we got the house without realtor's fees. And then we paid a broker we had been working with, we paid him 1% to just basically remote. Yeah. And using the team approach, buyers, brokers, appraisers. Don't be too willing to, don't get too attached to a house. Again, your greatest negotiating technique is just to walk away. And then I'll finish here with we'll leave this for Thursday. So today we've talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about the mortgage loans, calculations. We talked about the process. Again, I think you guys can save a lot of money if you do it well. Thanks, everyone.